The Monroe Doctrine, announced by President James Monroe on December 2, 1823, was a landmark policy statement that shaped the foreign relations of the United States for centuries. It emerged in the context of a rapidly changing world, as the Napoleonic Wars had ended in 1815, and European powers were seeking to restore their colonial empires. In Latin America, revolutionary movements had successfully overthrown Spanish and Portuguese rule, leading to the independence of many nations, including Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and Chile. The United States, still a relatively young republic, viewed these developments with both optimism and caution. President Monroe, influenced by his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, sought to ensure that these new nations would not fall under the dominion of European monarchies, particularly those of the Holy Alliance, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, which sought to restore conservative rule across the world. At the same time, Great Britain, with its powerful navy, was also opposed to European recolonization of Latin America, as it had developed strong economic interests in the region. Monroe's address to Congress laid out three key principles that would define U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere. First, he declared that the American continents were no longer open to future colonization by European powers, essentially stating that any attempts to establish new colonies in the Americas would be considered illegitimate. Second, he emphasized that the political systems of the New World and the Old World were fundamentally different, arguing that the United States and the newly independent Latin American nations were based on republican ideals, while Europe remained dominated by monarchies. This was a clear assertion that the Western Hemisphere should not be subject to European-style governance. Third, and most crucially, Monroe warned that any attempt by European powers to interfere in the affairs of nations in the Western Hemisphere, whether through military intervention or political manipulation, would be regarded as a direct threat to the United States. Although the doctrine was framed in strong language, the United States at the time lacked the military capability to enforce it. However, Britain, which had commercial and strategic reasons for keeping Latin America free from Spanish control, was willing to support the Monroe Doctrine through its naval power. This de facto British enforcement helped give credibility to Monroe's declaration, even though it was primarily a symbolic assertion of American policy rather than an immediately enforceable measure. Over the following decades, the Monroe Doctrine evolved into a cornerstone of American foreign policy and was invoked by various presidents in different contexts. In the late 19th century, the doctrine was expanded through the Roosevelt Corollary, articulated by President Theodore Roosevelt in 1904, which asserted that the United States had the right to intervene in Latin American countries to prevent instability or European involvement. While Monroe's original statement was meant to prevent European colonialism, Roosevelt used it to justify American interventionism, leading to increased U.S. involvement in the region, including military occupations in countries such as the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Nicaragua. This shift marked a transformation of the doctrine from a policy of defense against European imperialism to a tool for American dominance in Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine remained a key principle throughout the 20th century, invoked during the Cold War to counter Soviet influence in Cuba and other parts of Latin America. While its original intent was to protect the sovereignty of nations in the Western Hemisphere, its later applications often served as a pretext for U.S. interventionism. Today, the legacy of the Monroe Doctrine remains complex, symbolizing both America's early assertion of independence from European affairs and its long history of influence, sometimes welcomed, sometimes resented, over Latin America.